Welcome to Norse Code, the number one podcast for your Minnesota Vikings. I am your host and producer. My name is James Poise-gazi. Thank you so much for listening. And on the other end of the tin can and string, I'd like to bring in our analyst and co-host. He writes for the Daily Norseman. He writes for several blogs around the internets. And his name is Arif Hassan. Arif, how you doing tonight?
I'm good. How are you?
Fantastic. Dusty is on assignment. He's actually in the middle of moving, and anyone who has moved before knows that internet is like the last thing that you get when you move. So Dusty will be back, most likely next week, and we'll be talking about some bye week stuff after the Vikings Broncos game. But we have lots and lots of stuff to get to. We would like to first thank you for listening, and we have mentioned in the past that if you'd like to donate to the show, you're more than welcome to at our website at norsecodepodcast.com. At the very bottom, there's a little donate link. You can also go to our Patreon page, which is going to be linked there as well, and on the Daily Norseman page for the show notes. We're getting the shilling right out of the way, just like right out of the way, so we can get right into the Broncos game. Real excited about this weekend. We don't play really a lot of high-end teams this year. I don't know if it's just strength of schedule or what, but this one looks like it's going to be kind of cool. But we wanted to just mention donate link. We're just trying to keep the show going, try to keep the lights on, and try to keep this as ad-free as possible. You don't want Arif talking about MeUndies. It's just not something that you want to be dealing with. That's not.
Although, if we're going to talk about underwear, I've got some great recommendations.
Yeah. There's some sock places, too.
I, too, am a fan of the Red Hot Chili Peppers. How did you know?
I wasn't necessarily referring to that, but I mean, if we're going to go there, we're going to go there. Last show, we had mentioned about the mattress thing. There's a mattress company that is doing podcast advertisements and stuff. I finally found out which podcast it was. It turns out that wrestling celebrity and 16-time world champion Ric Flair has a podcast.
Holy shit! Really?
Really. And by the way, it's awesome. But that's where I heard the ad. About a month ago, I had a really long drive that was just middle of nowhere, North Dakota, to DJ a wedding. And when I was driving up there, I was like, I need something interesting to listen to. Wow, Ric Flair has a podcast, and there's like 10 episodes. Download them all now.
That is so amazing.
So I proceeded to do that, and halfway through the episode, he talks about they do this really awful quasi live commercial for the mattresses, and I think one of the lines is, and once you bring it, it's nothing like bringing them to Space Mountain when you do it on this type of mattress. Like, you got to try this type of mattress. I wouldn't have been divorced 3 times if we would have had this type of mattress. Like, wow, that is amazing. I kind of want to be sponsored by a mattress place. I feel like if we're gonna do it, if we're gonna have an advertiser, we should have something like really out of the ordinary, like that. Or when fighters would come out and they'd have condom depots just blasted on their ass, just like big letters, condomdepot.com. Yeah. But we try to avoid the advertisements if at all possible and make fun of them for a few minutes anyway each show. So if you'd like to donate and keep that going, you can go to norsecodepodcast.com. So we have all sorts of things to talk about, and we have a special guest to bring on as well. In just a little bit, we're going to bring on radio host for AM 1340 in Denver, Colorado. His name is Benjamin Allbright. He's going to be a fantastic guest. He's going to break down the Broncos game with Arif and kind of go over the ins and outs of basically their entire team, including their backup quarterback. So looking forward to that. We'll be bringing that in just a few minutes. But we want to start with the big news coming out of the Vikings today, which is Wednesday. The big news being Adrian Peterson threw some interesting shade over at Christian Ponder. And I guess my question is whether or not this is necessarily true. Adrian Peterson was speaking to reporters today, and he was asked the question about the biggest difference between Christian Ponder and Teddy Bridgewater. And he responded that if Ponder had the same, and this is just a paraphrase, if Ponder had the same poise that Bridgewater has, that he would still be a starting quarterback in the league. Basically saying that Bridgewater is just has better poise, is just better at the position, really. Arif, is this, first off, is this correct? And is this the right thing for AP to be saying?
Honestly, as far as Adrian Peterson just saying whatever shit's on his mind, this probably ranks low on the list.
It's pretty refreshing, I think.
Yeah, right. And mind you, the list includes phrases like the NFL treats us players like slaves, and literally everything he said during the I didn't realize why I beat my child was wrong, but I guess it's wrong controversy. So there's a lot of things on this list that so relatively speaking, it's like, you have to take it for what it is. But I think that he was just trying to be nice to Teddy, and he's just not good at saying things that avoid controversy, which is not to say that what he said was necessarily wrong. And honestly, I would rather take, this world where athletes just say whatever shit's on their mind instead of trying to be, a little bit more controversy averse.
The scene in Hard Knocks this year is the best example of which, where the coach is bringing up, actually has some of the rookies in the meeting go, so what do you think about the quarterback battle this week? Don't know. Just working on getting better one day at a time. Just drilling that into them. Like this is AP without a filter, and frankly, it's pretty damn hilarious.
Yeah, and it's great. And like the only exception I have to, it would be nice if athletes could say whatever they wanted to say is, I'm not particularly interested in hearing like racist, sexist, whatever stuff. So I mean that's the obvious caveat. But just throwing shade players, that's kind of awesome. And I want more of it, and I don't even think that was his intention. But he does bring up an interesting question. If Christian Ponder had poise, would he still be the starting quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings? And secondary question that he did not bring up, but is sort of like a logical extension, would that be a good thing? Would a version of Christian Ponder that has poise, be a good thing? So I think to answer that question, one of the things that you want to look at is kind of defining poise. And I think that maybe the easiest way to do that, and this doesn't like compose the entire thing, because, there are a couple of studies that indicate that the more you hit the quarterback, the more the performance decreases, and they don't really extract that from performance under pressure. So you can't really say that that's necessarily good research, but let's for the moment believe that, the more you hit the quarterback, the more the performance decreases, because that's a pretty reasonable belief. And if we believe that, then we don't have the ability to really test this holistically. But maybe the best way to take a look at this is the differences between how a quarterback performs under pressure and how a quarterback performs, when there's not, that much pressure. And I think maybe the best example of a version of Christian Ponder, somebody who's very similar to Christian Ponder but has poise, or I should say maybe more poise, is Alex Smith, and not every version of Alex Smith. So let's compare 2012 Christian Ponder to say 2013 Alex Smith.
There's been so many versions of Alex Smith.
Right. There's the every single different offensive coordinator at San Francisco Alex Smith. There's the first year in Kansas City Alex Smith. There's the third year in Kansas. It's just great.
Oh, my favorite Alex Smith was the I'm finally playing well and finally have an offensive coordinator for 2 straight years, and I get hurt and Kaepernick takes my job. I think that's
Wally pipped by a terrible quarterback. How is this happening?
Exactly. I think that's my favorite version of Alex Smith. The oh my God, I'm getting paid the rest of my contract.
All right, so if you take a look at 2012 Christian Ponder, which is like, the Christian Ponder that was probably sort of the most interesting because the team was winning and he was maybe performing at his worst for an extended period of time. You could take a look at his playing under pressure. He was 6.8 yards per attempt with no pressure, which is a little lower than average. It's lower than average. And his quarterback rating when he wasn't under pressure was 95.9, which is pretty decent. But for a quarterback, when you get rid of their pressure, is all right. But when he was under pressure, he was just awful. 4.1 yards per attempt, a quarterback rating of 41. 3 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It's awful, right? But what is a quarterback who has poise but is kind of has the same athletic profile and the same passing profile as Christian Ponder? So Alex Smith, he's an athletic quarterback that doesn't tend to use his wheels all that often, but it's kind of interesting and effective when he does. He threw for 7 yards an attempt, or 6.9 yards per attempt without pressure in 2013. He's a short thrower. He's a quick thrower, and he has a high completion percentage. So relatively close to Christian Ponder. You take a look at him under pressure in 2013, 6.9 yards per attempt, virtually identical, 96.9 quarterback rating, virtually identical. Under pressure, 76.2 quarterback rating, 6.0 yards per attempt, 7-2 touchdown interception ratio. And he was under pressure, a pretty similar proportion in 2013 as Christian Ponder was in 2012. So I think that's maybe the best example. And Alex Smith, of course, is still starting for the team that he started for in 2013 after he didn't start for the team that he was starting for in 2012. And so the question is, would Alex Smith still be starting for the Vikings? And I think the answer is probably yes. Quote unquote, good Alex Smith, not, the one that was fighting a quarterback battle with like David Carr. But good Alex Smith would still be with the Minnesota Vikings, and it would be frustrating as hell. So that would be a bad thing. But yeah, I think that's maybe the closest you're going to get to having maybe an answer to that question. That's not necessarily definitive. Christian Ponder wasn't extraordinarily impressive when there wasn't pocket pressure or anything like that. And maybe if he's in a situation where he gets a bit more pressure than normal, he looks even worse. Or maybe he turns into Blaine Gabbert or David Carr. But I think that he probably would be the starting quarterback, but we'd already seen a ceiling. And that would be a little bit frustrating. So we'd be in quarterback purgatory, which is what the Chiefs kind of are in now. It's what the Bengals are in with Andy Dalton, where you have a quarterback who, if you get rid of him and try for another quarterback, odds are you're going to get worse, but you're not going to win a lot with that quarterback playing like they do unless you have a dominant defense. So I will say that Adrian Peterson is right, which is weird because he doesn't say a ton of things that cause controversy where he's on the right side of things. And second, that would suck.
This version of AP is quite interesting. He also he was asked the question, "Do you think you have another MVP year in him?" And of course he has to say yes, but his response was very Adrian, and that he's like, "Well, it's not a question of just one. It's 2 or 3.
2 or 3, right?" But he did say, "Is this a trap?" Because every time they ask him about getting like 3,000 yards or 5,000 yards or 2,000 yards or whatever. He's like, yeah, I believe it. I have to believe it. But this last year he said, y'all keep asking me that. It's not that I think that, it's clear that I'm going to get 5,000 yards or whatever, and people are just going to have to watch out or whatever. It's that I have to set that goal for myself and I have to believe it. And you ask me this question, it becomes a controversy, and it's a dumb question and a dumb controversy. But it's not like if we win, I'm fine. But you have to set goals for yourself, and you have to set them high. So I'm getting 2,500 yards this year. So that's the goal. But it's not like I'm making a proclamation to the rest of the league. And so he's getting wise to some of these controversies that we kind of manufacture when he says stuff. But at the same time, he's not avoiding other controversies. Or like the time LaShawn McCoy said he's the best running back in the league, and Adrian Peterson was basically like, you don't even believe that.
Be like, there is no one who believes your claim to this. There is no family in this whole show that believes anything at all what you're saying.
That was amazing. He was just like, no, I saw him say that in the interview, and I don't think he believes himself. You got to say it with your chest. He didn't say it with his chest. I'm obviously the best. That was pretty awesome.
Well, That's got to be a nice fun fraternity of guys being like, yeah, we can all say everything, but the guy in purple over there kind of he kind of runs stuff for now. Yeah.
Back when he looked at AP's mouth fondly, as one would a naive child, instead of, oh man, that's kind of embarrassing.
Exactly. So next thing we want to bring up is kind of related to the third thing I want to bring up, in that Brock Vereen has been dropped by the Bears and has been picked up by the Vikings. This is of note because he is a safety and because he played at the University of Minnesota.
Yeah, no, it's exciting. Obviously he's played at TCF as a professional. He played, I think, all of the snaps for Chicago as a free safety in the end of the season last year. But it's kind of cool that he's going to play in TCF again as a member of the home team. And there's a lot of exciting things I think about Brock Vereen. A lot of things that are reasons that he was cut or reasons that he fell in the draft. I think he was a 6th-round pick or something. But fundamentally, who he is as a player is he's athletic and he's smart. And that's awesome. And I think that's something that you can work with, and I think it's something that the Vikings like. A lot of people know Brock Vereen is brothers with Shane Vereen, who's currently the New York Giants, one of the running backs. He was, obviously a little bit more well-known as a Patriots running back, but, that's who he is. And he, in college, he played both cornerback and safety. In the NFL, he's more of a safety. And he's very fluid in terms of his movements, and he has, the ability to diagnose, although he's kind of a little bit later to react than a lot of other safeties. He doesn't have great hands when he gets his hands on the ball. I think a lot of Gophers fans remember this. He got a lot of, pass deflections, but he didn't get a lot of interceptions. And he gets a lot of tackles. He's in on a lot of tackles, and he kind of knows where he needs to be. And everyone knows that he's got this great work ethic coming out of the University of Minnesota. But despite being 200 pounds, pretty ideal for a safety, especially at his height, 6'0", he's not necessarily as explosive when he runs through tackles or when he hits. There are some concerns, I think, about his durability. Back when he was playing for Minnesota, he had a torn meniscus, and he plays violently, even if he doesn't play with, a bunch of explosiveness. But I think that this is the kind of guy that, despite the fact that he's on the practice squad right now, when you carry him into camp next year, he could potentially be kind of who Anton Exum was this year, the kind of guy who's, drafted late, kind of a long shot, but he has a lot of skills that you want or need in the position that will allow him to challenge for a starting position. Now, obviously, Anton Exum, he didn't end up challenging for the starting position. And a lot of that has to do with, picking up the playbook, at least according to Mike Zimmer. And some of it has to do with like diagnosis and instincts and coverage ability. But Brock Vereen can maybe play a similar role, and they have the ability to train him in their scheme. Part of this has to do with the fact that Chicago is in the middle of a fire sale. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But as they get rid of more and more players that they think don't fit their scheme, some players who are actually pretty good, who for some reason they don't think fit their scheme, are going to be let go or traded. And I think Brock Vereen is one of those players who's agile, he's fast, and he's smart. You just have to train him on technique. You have to make him trust his instincts a little bit more, tell him that what he's doing he should do, and you have to teach him a little bit in terms of tackling through people instead of at people. And he's got really high intangibles too. So, I think, this is the kind of guy that, you can be excited about, not just because he's a hometown pick, but also because he's a hometown pick, but because he has a lot of tools. He just needs to be trained up to play safety at the NFL level, which we all know is hard because safety is one of the thinnest positions in the NFL right now, along with like offensive guard.
So let's talk about that fire sale that Chicago seems to be having right now.
They get rid of someone else, huh?
They did get rid of someone else. They got rid of someone that the Vikings would believe is notable. Former Viking Jared Allen was traded to the Panthers for peanuts, and Jared Allen is going to be paid all of the money that was owed to him, but the Bears are basically footing the bill. According to the Pro Football Talk article, the Bears paid Allen more than $14.6 million during his year and a half with the team. Most of that came in the form of an $11.5 million roster bonus he got in March. All the Panthers will end up paying him is $800,000, which is the remainder of his $1 million base salary. So the Bears,
good deal for the Panthers.
Oh, it's a great deal for the Panthers. You make that deal, 2 or 3 times a day like that. That's a great deal for you. If he ends up turning out halfway decent, you got him for nothing. So the Bears are cutting a bunch of people who may not necessarily work in their scheme, or they're just going, okay, well, we need to start paring down. But I'm kind of curious what you think is going on with the Bears right now. Is this actually a fire sale, or is this something that they probably should have gotten done in the preseason?
I think that, I think it's both. I think that, this is a sign that the Bears are giving up on players and giving up on the season a little bit. Because, they're getting rid of people that have the ability to succeed and can contribute on the field. And I was actually wrong about Brock Osweiler. I did a little bit searching. He was a 4th-round pick, so an even better coup, I think, for the Vikings, because it looks like, NFL personnel actually thought a little bit more highly of him than I thought. But, the Bears traded Jared Allen away. They also traded, away a player that I liked in the draft, John Bostic. But, Jared Allen for I guess, a 6th-round pick. And, it's just interesting that the Bears are doing this in the middle of the season. I think that, when you do it in the preseason, you're finding ways to get players that you want on your roster. You're doing it so that you can accumulate as many assets as possible while also, maximizing the efficiency of your roster. But when you're doing it in the middle of the season, it looks a lot more like you're trying to recover. You answered a couple of questions that you didn't know the answers to. In this case, the answer to that question is no, Jared Allen, it cannot be a 3-4 linebacker. No, John Bostic is only a 4-3 linebacker. And no, Brock Osweiler isn't learning the scheme, or isn't his tools don't fit what we want to do. And they didn't know that. Now they know that, and now they've reduced the talent level of their team. Especially because if you do it in the preseason, you have the opportunity to sign players who were cut from waivers before other teams pick them up. That didn't happen here. So, yeah, I think the Bears are bad, and they got worse. Not much worse. Jared Allen wasn't doing much for them, right? But, yeah, they got worse.
It's just interesting to watch the Bears sort of react to this, and Bears fans are a little iffy on it, but all the Vikings fans need to be concerned about is now I feel like you can wear your Jared Allen jerseys back to Vikings games. I feel like the rule should be that if he leaves the division, then you're allowed to wear the jersey again. As long as you're not wearing a Darren Sharper jersey, then you should be fine. I feel like Darren Sharper is like the one jersey you're not allowed to wear anymore.
Yeah, I'm a little iffy on Favre jerseys, but I think Darren Sharper, that's a pretty hard rule. Like, you can't really get around that.
Nope, you cannot get around that. I think Deadspin had posted an article of or like a picture of a little kid wearing a Sharper jersey, and partially forgivable, I suppose. Maybe that was a pickup on.
But the parents aren't forgiven, though.
No. Kid is totally forgiven. The kid doesn't. The kid probably doesn't understand the whole Google thing. But like, yeah, the parents the parents should have maybe checked that out. Possibly, like, you pick it up, but maybe like, oh, well, we're dressing him up as this. I just want to see if this guy has ever raped anybody and is currently in jail. Oh. Well,
funny that we asked.
Maybe we should go spend the $25 on an Adrian Pete. No, he did something too. Okay, well, maybe we should get a Favre jersey. He's never done any. No. Who hasn't done something stupid on the? Can we get? I know. Let's get a Chris Cook jersey. I bet that one's gonna be nice and cheap, and that's fun for the kids and for everybody else. Oh.
Oh, damn. What about, let's go back in history a little bit. What about, Fred Smoot? That's a fun name.
Hey,
Smoot is... patches?
Smoot's a great name. I wonder if we can... Oh, there's a little boat on this jersey. That's awesome.
It's a boat on the jersey.
There's a little boat on this jersey. Oh, it's a Brian...
for Vikings, a longboat. That's so great.
That's great. I don't understand why the word sex is written on it, but it's nice. I feel like we got a little off track there, but feel like all
Yeah.
of
So you can wear your Jared Allen jerseys again.
yes.
We'll see what the Bears try to do at outside linebacker. It'll probably be Lamar Houston again. It'll probably be Pernell McPhee because they don't like Shane McClellan at outside linebacker, and so they moved him to inside linebacker,
Right.
A position that he also cannot play. And I guess the Bears still haven't done anything about their offensive line because Vladimir Ducasse, I believe, is still starting. So that's great news for the Vikings.
Yeah, there's everything that we've been saying is pretty much good news for the Vikings. Man, the Bears are just and I don't want to bring attention to it necessarily, but the picture that had come out of from a person who was selling shirts outside of Wrigley Field, and I feel like I had sent this to both you and Dusty back when this had come out, was somebody was selling a shirt next to Wrigley Field, and it had a picture of Cutler with a gun to his head, and it said something like $500 says he misses. Like,
yeah, that was good.
The tide is turning in Chicago slowly but surely, and he might have signed a new deal fairly recently, but God, this cannot keep going, can it? Like, it's great on the outside. Like, don't get me wrong, I love watching Jay Cutler throw interceptions. Jay Cutler getting interceptions and getting picks and getting sacked. It brings a joy to my day that otherwise would not be there. But this can't keep going, can it?
I think it can. I think the depths of their misery have yet to be sorely tested.
Like, they benched him last year, I realize, but he's still there. Anyway, not the point. Chicago is having a fire sale, so if you're interested in some spare parts or just want to accumulate your pile of recently useless NFL players, go down to Chicago and talk to them. They are apparently not willing to talk about anything.
Well, let's see. The Vikings could use Adrian Amos, the safety, so maybe we could pick him up. Let's see. Is there anyone else from Chicago that the Vikings could use?
I don't know if the Vikings could use him, but there was some talk that the Cowboys...
Alshon Jeffrey, that's who the Vikings should try and trade for.
Yep, the Cowboys were reportedly in talks for Matt Forte at one point.
Oh, that makes sense.
If
they're in the middle of a fire sale, they probably should have just let Matt Forte go.
Yeah, like what's if you're gonna go, you might as well go full New Orleans on this.
Oh,
yeah, like
full New Orleans.
Yeah, full New
Orleans.
Get
rid of your talented 5-tech for a backup tight end.
Exactly.
Just do it.
What's the worst that could happen by getting rid of the best receiver on your team? What could possibly go wrong with getting rid of him during the middle of his prime? The only positive to that is that
you get a declining center.
Yeah, the only positive to that appears to be that Seattle doesn't know what the hell to do with him either.
I mean, that's incredible.
Yeah,
and I love it. But also, nope, just love it.
I like how one trade managed to make both teams worse. Like, I don't necessarily understand exactly how that worked, but
Seattle's biggest problem was on the offensive line, so they naturally got rid of their most talented offensive lineman.
Yes.
And then they drafted an athletic defensive tackle in the 7th round and asked him to play center. Luckily, he hasn't cracked the starting roster yet, but it's only a matter of time.
It's just a matter of time before his stink just infects the rest of that line. Good stuff. Again, one trade made two teams worse. It's amazing. All right, so let's talk about the game. As promised, we have a special guest this week. We'd like to bring in a man by the name of Benjamin Allbright. He is a radio host on AM 1340 in Denver, Colorado. Benjamin, how you doing today?
Outstanding, brother. How about yourself?
Not too bad. So we wanted to bring you in to talk about the Broncos, but it turns out the Broncos are not necessarily your first love. You are a born and bred Chiefs fan living in Denver. I suppose that makes sense because I've heard that no one who actually lives in Boulder or Denver is actually from Boulder or Denver. But
That is shockingly true.
Yeah. So how does a born and bred Chiefs fan end up on the radio in Denver with the Broncos?
Well, the radio career thing, you kind of bounce around a lot, trying to move up and find a better market, better job kind of thing. Moving from Little Rock to Tampa to Denver kind of moved me up that way, which is where I got my radio, the radio start. Kansas City, I grew up there in my youth. Spent a large portion of my youth there during the Okoye years, and that's really what kind of cemented my love of football. So I've just kind of always been a Chiefs fan in the background, I guess.
I guess my first question to you, Benjamin, is the main person on everyone's radar for the game is going to be Peyton Manning. The news reports have come out, the SI reports have come out about lacking feeling in his fingertips, or just the throws seem a little off this year, but he still seems to be somewhat effective. Should Peyton Manning and the Denver Broncos be concerned about the Vikings defense and the defensive line that's coming right at them?
Well, I think this is an NFL team. You should always be concerned about the defensive line coming at them. One of the things about the Vikings is the national, I guess, perception, or at least the Denver and the regional perception is this is kind of a no-name defense. There's, of course, you have guys like Harrison Smith and Xavier Rhodes that are very good, and guys that I'm familiar with most of the Vikings defensive roster, but the average fan is not. So the average fan hears names like Brian Robinson, Everson Griffin, Linval Joseph, and they're like, who? And that's not, I don't think that's good for Denver fans who are kind of coming into this game maybe a little overconfident. Denver fans are coming into this game thinking that this is another maybe tune-up game like the last game, and I'm a little worried. You've got a team that matches up pretty well. Denver's got a poor offensive line. You've got an offensive line that can generate, and a guy, Anthony Barr, there is a pass rusher who can really get after the quarterback. You've got an offense and Adrian Peterson who runs the football very well, and a quarterback who thrives off play action that I think Adrian Peterson allows him to set up. So, I'm a little more worried about this game than I think a lot of the callers we've certainly had this week.
Pivoting off a little bit about what James said in terms of making this a little bit about Peyton Manning. If I recall correctly, in 2012, Manning got off to and the offense overall got off to kind of a slow start. But as more and more of the Tom Moore offense that he is familiar with in Indianapolis got installed, the more prolific it came. Of course, in 2013, he started off with a huge bang. In 2014, he started off even better. Now he's with the new offensive coordinator, from what I'm hearing, and obviously I'm not sort of as tuned in as you are, but from what I'm hearing, it sounds like more and more of the stuff that he's familiar with is being introduced back into games, and they're moving away from the stuff that Kubiak does, at least in the passing game. Is that is something that you've noticed? Is that something that's improving the offensive efficiency of Denver, or is that kind of being made up?
Well, it's kind of being made up a little bit. There's some truth to that, and I guess I'll elaborate on that. Look, what they're trying to do here is trying to marry the two concepts up. Kubiak wants to be able to run. He wants to be able to run the football effectively, and he wants to run balanced. So Peyton is familiar with being out of the shotgun, and obviously that's giving you runaway right away which way you're going with it, unless you have an option quarterback who can read option and run the other direction. So what they've experimented with against Detroit was running out of a pistol set that allows you to have the running back directly in line behind the quarterback, keeps you balanced, that kind of thing. The things that have been wrong with Peyton so far this season are twofold. Number one, he doesn't like being under center. Dropping those 7-step drops out from under center, he doesn't get to survey the field the way that he does out of the shotgun, get that wide-angle look and looking at everything and diagnosing. And then secondarily, tempo. The Broncos play calling process under Kubiak is a collective process between him, Rick Dennison, and quarterback coach Greg Knapp, and it's a 3-man decision that then gets relayed to the headset to Peyton Manning, and that eats up about 9 to 10 seconds of the clock, where Peyton is used to having a play, 4 audibles, and running with a no-huddle kind of tempo so he can get up there quick and then start surveying what the defense lays out. It gives him 10, 15 seconds to diagnose, call out, and then turn around and get the play in. And what we're seeing now is that they're shifting to allowing Peyton to have his tempo and moving to the pistol while still using Kubiak concept offense.
Okay, and like you said, in terms of marrying these kinds of things, it sounds like they've got some hiccups along the way. It sounds like they're solving some of those hiccups. So, that boring game we saw at the very beginning of the year, that's not going to be an effective preview for what the Vikings are going up against here in Week 4. Then, right?
Yeah, you'll see almost none of what you saw in week one from the offensive side of the ball. The one play that they still run out of that offense is the toss, which has been pretty effective. That outside toss run play has been the only effective run play the Broncos have had so far. Other than that, every run play that they've had has gone for 2, 3, or 4 yards. They're not getting negatives. They're not being stuffed in the backfield, but they're only getting 2 yards, 2.8 yards per play on a lot of this stuff. So it is a concern. It is something they're working on. But they do have a defense that's top 5 in the league and able to bail them out right now.
Okay, and then sort of expanding that discussion about Peyton Manning, it sounds like he's used to not having to worry that much about the offensive line. It's just not something that has been as big for Peyton Manning as it is maybe for other quarterbacks. But where in this case, it seems like the offensive line is struggling so much. And some of that might be attributed to an anemic run game, but the offensive line it seems to be struggling so much that it's having a bigger impact on Manning this year than other years. Do you expect that to be a problem going forward into the season, not just in this game?
Well, it certainly is a problem right now. Number one, you got a lot of youth on that line. And then number two, the guy you brought in as a free agent, you brought him in completely out of football shape. And he's kind of a me guy. That's Evan Mathis. Mathis is a guy who kind of, bumps his man to the outside and then kind of tries to cut down and help the center out. And that puts your offensive tackle on an island against 2 pass rushers. And we've seen it several times where, he grades out high with guys like Pro Football Focus because it looks like he's taking care of his man when the reality is he's just rerouted him to a rookie left tackle who lacks NFL strength. So there's been a lot of disappointment in Evan Mathis so far. That's certainly not what they were expecting out of him. And then looking at the other youth, it's just going to take some time for his line to gel. This is a new line put together, a lot of youth on it. May not have NFL strength in some cases. And again, I'm pointing to Ty Sambrayo there, who by the way is injured and may not play.
Oh my!
So his backup would be Max Garcia, worst case scenario. So that's something we're kind of eyeing this week to see where we're at. But yeah, it's not good. The line is definitely the weakness of this team.
And Max Garcia, I thought he was a guard. Is this is that going to be a huge issue? Are there any natural tackles? Okay.
There are some natural tackles, but it's a natural right tackle backup. They only really use him on the right side. They could move Clark over, but Garcia would probably be the guy to step in.
Sure. Then with that in mind, let's talk about the matchup that we talked about just, for a little bit. It sounds like, you're a little bit familiar with Brian Robinson, familiar with Everson Griffin, who had a great year last year proving his contract. I think he started off the year maybe just a tad bit slowly this year, but so far has shown up in the past 2 games. And then, of course, I think the interior defensive line is even stronger for the Vikings. That's, Linval Joseph, Sharif Floyd, and backup Tom Johnson, who is playing this year like he did last year, kind of crazy as a sub-rotation player. Who on that, defensive line do you think will have the biggest impact in terms of disrupting the Denver offense? And what do you think Denver needs to do in order to adjust for, what to me is right now an effective defensive line, one of the league leaders in quarterback hits?
Yeah. Okay. I think that the main concern here is the pass rush up the middle. That's always been the formula for stopping Peyton Manning. He's muddying the pocket right around his feet. You don't have to have an elite outside pass rush. You just have to be able to move the pocket back from the center. So I think Linval Joseph and Sharif Floyd are going to be the keys to this game. I think that how well they manipulate the centers and guards and push the pocket back into Peyton Manning is really going to affect him. When you move him off his spot, that's when the passes start to wobble. That's when the passes start to flutter. He can't get full strength on it. And that's, that has been the formula for stopping him. Moving him back in the pistol made it a lot easier for him to be able to do that last game. And you saw a significantly improved Peyton Manning against the Detroit Lions than you did against the Kansas City Chiefs or against the season opener game there that we played. So it's not it's not necessarily that outside pass rush. It's muddying the pocket at his feet. You don't have to hit him. You just have to move him.
You briefly mentioned confusing the interior offensive line. You've got a pretty young center. I actually don't know how to pronounce his last name because he pronounced it the other night and it was totally different. I thought it was Paradis. It's Paradis. How's that pronounced?
Matt Paradis is the way to pronounce it.
Okay, yeah, he's a pretty young guy, and Zimmer's known, and Peyton Manning even mentioned it. The Mike Zimmer defense. Zimmer's known to try and confuse sort of the interior assignments. The most famous example of which, of course, is the double A gap blitz, but he also threatens defensive back pressure and so forth. Do you think the confusion caused by the I wouldn't say an exotic pass rushing scheme, but one that requires the center to make the correct decision and the guards as well is going to cause, significant problems? Or do you think that the center so far has shown that he has the ability to handle these kinds of assignments?
Yeah, I think that he's young, and they've used Evan Mathis to kind of double up with him a lot. You saw it on the drive block in the end zone there for the touchdown against Detroit. It's not ideal because, again, it leaves Sambraio out on an island. And the last thing you want is rookie Ty Sambraio out there, trying to fend for himself. But they've tried to use Mathis to help him out, and then use the tight end to help Sambraio out, and it's sort of worked. It's certainly not something you'd be happy with, but it's been effective enough thus far. I think it's going to be trouble in the coming game.
Yeah, that makes sense. Let's talk about offensive weapons for a second. And by that, I mean skilled players. So we could talk a little bit about C.J. Anderson, but what's more interesting to me first is a discussion of the receivers. I think we kind of all know about Demaryius Thomas. There's not a ton of discussion, I think, to be had with him, but it sounds like, and this is something that I noticed at the beginning of the year and in the offseason, you're having some arguments on Twitter about it. It was something that I found interesting to watch. But Emmanuel Sanders is someone that people don't seem to have gauged accurately in terms of his talent level. Can you tell Vikings fans a little bit about him?
Yeah, look, I think Emmanuel Sanders is the best wide receiver on this team. I've caught a lot of flack for being pretty public about that, but if you go back, you look at the numbers, you look at the tape, he's the guy Peyton trusts on third down. He's the guy who works the middle of the field. He's the vertical threat too. Demaryius Thomas gets a lot of pop screen stuff because he's too strong for most corners to bring down. And if you look, a lot of Demaryius' yardage is yardage after the catch because he breaks tackles and things like that. Emmanuel's the guy who creates natural separation. Demaryius doesn't do that. You lob the ball up and hope he gets it, or he. They set him up on screenplays. Sanders is a guy who can work any part of the field. You can use him on the pop screen. You can use him on the slant. He's got a full route tree at his disposal. He'll eat you up in the middle of the field. He's quicker than fast, but he is fast as well. And he makes sharp cuts. I mean, he's an immaculate route runner. Peyton trusts him. Reminds me a lot of Marvin Harrison in the way he plays the game, the way that he approaches the game, I should say. He's a technician. But he has certainly measurable athleticism. I think he's the most valuable player on this team right now. I think that on the offensive side of the football anyway, he's the guy when they need a catch, he's the guy they go to. And there's a reason that they're getting 46% of their third downs right now. That's because they can go to Emmanuel. They know they can trust him.
Okay, and on the flip side of that is Cody Latimer. A lot of people, I think in draft Twitter, a lot of people in fantasy Twitter, they wanted to see Cody Latimer emerge because, he's physically a very tantalizing prospect. But also, he was drafted in the second round, and, we still haven't seen very much of him play. Why is that?
Well, he's struggling to get the playbook. He's what you call a slow learner, and he's kind of been eclipsed by Benny Fowler. Benny Fowler's had a pretty good camp. He's been doing real well, and out of Michigan State, and he's a big body as well. I mean, you're looking at a guy that's 6'2", 220, and he's been out there doing it. Now, all the teammates will tell you Latimer has the best hands on the team. The problem is he rounds out his cuts, doesn't not a great route runner, and he's just struggled with the playbook. So when you look at the fact that you've got you're a team that's got 7 rostered wide receivers, and 5 of them are doing significantly better through camp. It's just been a struggle for Cody.
And in terms of like things like route running and stuff like that, it sounds like that is probably just a little bit more important to an offense run by Peyton Manning than it is maybe most other offenses. Do you think that maybe Peyton Manning is also having maybe an influence on the number of snaps that Cody Latimer's receiving because his comfort level has a lot to do with timing?
Yeah, there's definitely some of that. Peyton has to trust that you're going to be where you're going to be, where you're supposed to be. He demands precision. He's a diagnosed OCD guy, and he spends all that time in the film room and all that time out there working out the steps and the exact timing and things like that. So he knows, knows where everybody's at. And if you got a guy who's struggling to grasp the playbook, who's relying on athleticism rather than being a technician and doing the routes the way he's supposed to, that throws off an offense, and it makes him a limited situation guy. It makes that sets Latimer up to basically be a 3-route guy, and they've already got a 3-route guy in Demarius, who's going to run the post, the fly, and the screens. So there's not. Why would you bring Demarius off the field to put Latimer on if he's not hurt?
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. Let's expand the discussion a little bit to talk about, some of the Vikings defensive players and how they may match up to these receivers. There's Terrence Newman, who despite being, very old, seems to be playing pretty well so far. Then you've got, Xavier Rhodes has been cleared from the concussion protocol, which is, I think, fantastic news for Vikings fans. And then, of course, you've got Harrison Smith, who you already mentioned, and then, whatever safety of the week the Vikings decide to put next to him. Who do you think is the kind of matchup that you're worried by, and what kind of matchup are you looking forward to? Let's also include Captain Munnerlyn in that mix between the receivers and the defensive backs.
Well, I think Munnerlyn won't have too much of his hands full. The slot receiver Jordan Norwood isn't much to brag about, and he has a little problem with dropping the football. Looking on the outside, you're looking at Sanders and Thomas. Although we have a couple of plays lately where they try to motion Thomas into the slot where you can't jam him. I think that the Vikings are probably going to line up Rhodes on Thomas and Newman on Sanders, just because of Sanders' speed and the way Newman plays the game probably caters more to that. Rhodes can shut down Demarius. I can see that. I can't see Terrence Newman shutting down Emmanuel Sanders. I think that's going to be the problem matchup for the Vikings.
Okay, and then expanding the discussion a little bit more, we can talk about Owen Daniels, maybe why we haven't seen Virgil Green on the field, even though he's been a favorite for I think people who are interested in metrics for a very, very long time, and the running backs like C.J. Anderson and so forth. Why haven't we seen Virgil Green on the field, and who do you think these tight ends or running backs will match up with on the passing game, and why do you think that that's going to be a good or bad matchup for the Broncos?
Well, we have seen Virgil Green on the field. He actually caught a touchdown in I think it was week 2 against the Chiefs. He gets on there limitedly. Here's the problem. Virgil Green came out and he had better metric scores than Julius Thomas. The problem is that they tried to change what Virgil Green was. They tried to make him an H-back where he could play that second, move tight end, fullback, H-back kind of thing. And so they had him put on weight and kind of do that. And he's not the same player now that he's put all his weight on. He's basically lumbering out there. He doesn't have the speed, doesn't have the ability. And then you look at Owen Daniels. Owen Daniels is a shell of himself. The Broncos were heavily counting on Jeff Hireman to be a guy who factored in this year. And when he got hurt,
this year, wow,
yeah. Yes, and he was going to be it was going to be Daniels and him lining up as the 1 and 2 and using Virgil as the fullback. That's why they brought in James Casey, who's just been utterly ineffective, and he hasn't seen the field at all this year. And they also brought in Jodon Duncan, who they ended up cutting because he's more of a tight end as well than he is a fullback, and that didn't really work out for him. So it's kind of been a mess with not having a fullback and having guys that they're trying to find the right position for. Daniels really is a shell of himself. He's caught a couple of passes last week, but he's almost a non-factor. I mean, it's like having Anthony Fasano out there. It's not really, you're not scared of him. And Virgil, when you get down to the red zone, look for him on the post. But other than that, you're not really going to see him much in the game at all. It'd be another non-factor.
Sure, and then running back C.J. Anderson, I think fantasy players are a little bit upset with him. What's the deal? Is it the issues that we have integrating the two offensive approaches? Is C.J. Anderson just not as much of a talent as people thought? What's going on in terms of his production?
Well, its production's been hampered by an offensive line that can't seem to get the blocking down. This is a transition to a zone blocking scheme. This is a different look for, obviously for these guys. It's been a problem, and they're just not able to effectively drive, block, move guys out and create holes. So you got a running back with a toe injury out there who's already hampered a step, trying trying to get things going, and he just can't do it. Like I said, that toss play has been effective for him and Hillman, but going up the middle has just not been there because these guys aren't able to do what they need to do to move the defensive lines.
Okay, that all makes sense. What did you think of the Kubiak hire overall?
It was the higher. To be honest with you, here's something for you. I did not get tipped off early as to who they were going to do. I knew they talked to Gary Kubiak, but I didn't get any advance thing. But that was who I was stumping for. It was Gary Kubiak and Wade Phillips, kind of bring a reunion back for John Elway, for his former backup and former coach. And kind of do that. It's something in the city of Denver they like to do. You look at some of the coaches that they've had in the other sports, bringing Joe Sakic as general manager and Patrick Waugh back as coach of the Avalanche. It's a formula that's worked to a degree in other sports. So I thought it would be, it might be nice here. And this is a team that, with Peyton in the waning years, that maybe getting a coach who's more reliant on the run game might preserve him a little longer, might elongate that career. So that was kind of my who I was stumping for. So I was okay with it. The problem with Kubiak is that Kubiak's pretty. He's like Shanahan. It's whose tree he comes off of, and he's pretty dogmatic when it comes to running what he wants to run. And he calls this one particular play that it just drives me nuts when coaches do it, and that's running that 3-yard shallow out. That route is a complete loser in the NFL. It's the route Matt Schaub was picked on. You got all those pick sixes on.
Oh, again and
same
again
route.
and again. Yeah. Yes.
Same route, because you have to have the arm strength to drive it to the far hash, and you're only and you're using that arm strength after doing a flip set of your hips. You got to drop back, flip your hips, and then throw it to the outside, and you got to drive the football. And if anything is off, the slightest bit is off, you're going to lob that ball out there, and any competent defensive back is going to grab it out of the air and take it to the house. So it's a loser route, and it drives me bonkers when he runs it. Thankfully, this season he's been a little bit less inclined to run it, but I've already seen it 3 times, and I'm telling you, competent defensive backs sit camp on that route.
It's kind of funny that you mentioned that it's a loser in the NFL because, someone we both follow, Justice Mosqueda, swears by it as a high school coach. So I find that kind of funny. Well, let's switch sides a little bit, talk about the defense. Back in 2012, one of the reasons Peyton Manning, I think, came to the Denver Broncos over a lot of other teams is that they had a dominant defense, that he was walking into, and it was a good setup for him. And then the defense, it didn't seem to be as dominant as a lot of people were saying. Some of it has to do with, a Von Miller suspension, but some of it probably has to do with coaching. With Wade Phillips back, you've got a phenomenal defensive coach, and you have some, astounding defensive performances this year, I think, highlighted by a pass rush, but also some pretty good cornerbacks. What do you think is the keystone for this defense? And what do you think is the best way for the Vikings, who admittedly I think match up pretty poorly against this defense? What do you think is the best way for the Vikings to beat it?
Well, normally you would say with a defense like this, which is an attacking defense that puts corners out on an island, you're going to look to try to run at the pass rushers, and then you're going to wear them down, and then you're going to run off play action. You're going to try to get everybody to bite on play action so that you can get the deep ball on one of the guys out there on an island. The problem with that is that you've got probably the best secondary in the NFL, over here. When you look at Aqib Talib, and he's playing lights out right now. Bradley Roby, opposing quarterbacks have a 16 passer rating against him for the season, and Chris Harris, who might be the best nickel corner in the game, might be a top 5 corner as well. So you got guys that you can put out there on an island. And then the other problem is that your pass rushers, everybody knows who DeMarcus Ware and Von Miller are, but the backups to these two guys, Shane Ray and Shaq Barrett, have been phenomenal all through the preseason and this season. Barrett got a sack last game, as a matter of fact. So when they take Ware and Miller off the field, there's almost not really a huge drop in pass rush. It's been pretty comparable. So the normal formula you would use, which again is running the ball, running power at the pass rushers, and then coming off play action to pick on corners on an island. That's the formula you're going to have to go with, and you're just going to have to hope it works. The defensive line is short on depth. If you can sustain long drives early in the game, you're going to get good push late in the game and could salt the game away with a star running back like Adrian Peterson. The key is going to be, trying to work the deep middle of the field, with the one high safety that whatever one high safety Denver rolls at you, whether it's Darian Stewart, it's not going to be T.J. Ward. He's
Right.
He's downhill. He's basically the guy who sits between the jackbacker and the mic and plays as an additional linebacker
Right.
in this scheme. So it's probably going to be Darian Stewart. It might be David Bruton, but whoever they have one high back there, that's who you're going to have to hope to pick on with a tight end or a slot receiver.
Okay, and Kyle Rudolph, we haven't seen a bunch of him because of injury. Vikings signed him to a new contract. He had a bit of a miscue in the last game, but it's someone that the Vikings, at least the Vikings, are pretty high on. Fans are getting sort of a little impatient with him, but he's going to be the tight end. I mean, you're not going to see Michael Pruitt out there. You're not going to see Rhett Ellison challenging deep. It's going to be Kyle Rudolph who has the best ability to challenge in the seam. Do you have confidence that Darian Stewart or David Bruton have the ability to take on Rudolph?
Bruton certainly has shown a knack for the football. Darian Stewart's more of a hitter, but he's been out there playing one high as well and has done pretty well with it. I think that combination of the two is one of those marquee matchups. I don't want to say it's a coin flip, but I want to say that I have the confidence that they can cover him. I also have the confidence that Rudolph can beat them in situational football.
Sure. And then one person that we haven't talked about that I think you and I both agree is very talented is linebacker Brandon Marshall. Tell us a little bit about him.
Well, Brandon Marshall is an excellent sideline-to-sideline linebacker. Kind of think of Derek Johnson of the Chiefs, if you want a comparison.
This is pretty high praise.
Yeah, he's that guy. He's a vocal leader out there. He's the guy with the green dot on the helmet. He's calling the plays. He's one of the two middle linebackers. If there's a linebacker you want to pick on in this scheme, it's not him. It's right next to him, and that's Danny Trevathan, a guy coming off a knee injury, undersized, and if you can run with power, it's just basic physics, forces, mass times acceleration. Adrian Peterson's going to truck Danny Trevathan every time.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and with all of that in mind, do you think that bringing in Wade Phillips as a defensive coordinator, how has that changed the nature of the defense, both from like an attitude perspective, but also schematically?
Oh, it's both. Wade is diametrically opposite coach to Jack Del Rio, who was the defensive coordinator before. Jack Del Rio runs a basic 43. It's assignment football. You stay in your lane, and you read and react. And it's very basic football, but because it's basically the same defense and you get a lot of reps doing it, you can get very good at it, enough to the point where the defense becomes effective. Wade is different. Wade's philosophy is get to the quarterback. I'm going to blitz you. I'm going to send everything. We're getting to the quarterback. We're getting in the backfield. We're shutting it down. And so it's more of a rely on athleticism than smarts. At the snap of the ball, you're firing off and try to get to the quarterback and running back. They vary the amount of people they send, but it's never less than 5. You're never going to see a 4-man rush out of a Wade Phillips defense. They're sending 5.
5.
Yeah. What's that?
That's going to be an issue, I think, for the Vikings, given the way that they do their pass protection assignments. Well, I was just, because, Macalou's been playing better this year, but, that's to say that, he hasn't been up against, in my opinion, extraordinarily stellar pass rushers, but I think that he's been playing, pretty well for who he was, but he's still maybe a moment of concern. But my biggest issue right now is TJ Clemmings, who on half of the passing plays doesn't even take on the edge rusher. They'll often have, Rhett Ellison or Kyle Rudolph one-on-one in pass protection against the edge rusher. That's probably going to be Von Miller. As much as Kyle Rudolph has improved and is fantastic in pass protection as Rhett Ellison is, they're both tight ends. And so I'm a little bit worried, from that perspective, about the nature of the Denver pass rushing 5. Has there been an issue with the number of people dropping into coverage? I know that you said that, this kind of secondary has the ability to go man to man, which enables, a 5-person pass rush on, a fairly consistent basis. But, in terms of, quick responses by quarterbacks in responses to, in response to pressure, has that been an issue, or do you think that, this is going to be a game where we're going to have, both defensive lines tee off these offensive lines?
I think it's going to be the latter. I think you're going to have the defenses teeing off on the offenses. Here's the thing: is that you got the Broncos have already played a quick hitting offense. Kansas City's is a short, quick hit offense. They played that, and the defense just teed off on them. Last week, you saw a defense that covered Calvin Johnson in single coverage all game with Aqib Talib. That's the kind of confidence they have in these corners. It was all game long. It was Aqib Talib on Calvin, and there was no help, no safety help over the top, nothing, no bracket, nothing. So you got a team that's very confident in what they do in terms of the pass rush and in terms of those corners. You look at the rushes they were getting; they were all over Matt Stafford. You got Von Miller and you got DeMarcus Ware, two guys that'll get after it. And then, like I was saying earlier, you got two guys that you can take them off the field, give them 2 plays to catch their breath, bring in Shane Ray and Shaq Barrett, and have no drop off in production is ridiculous. I've never seen anything like this. I mean, Wade has coached some great defenses, but in terms of personnel, I've never seen anything like this.
And Shane Ray was somebody who I think before the draft Twitter was getting, more and more down on as time went on. That hasn't materialized. He's been playing excellently, you said?
Yeah, he's been playing really well. Shaq Barrett has probably been playing the best, and then but he's played very well. Ray comes in and spells DeMarcus Ware, and Shaq Barrett comes in and spells Von Miller.
Okay, Shaq Barrett, I was a huge fan of coming out, so it's good to hear. I was kind of upset the Vikings. It sounded like they didn't even try to sign him. Oh well. So let's talk just real quickly about special teams then. Sort of the final phase of the game. Or actually, no, I didn't even talk about the Vikings receiver matchups. You said that you've got a lot of confidence in the secondary. That makes a lot of sense. They have the ability to go on islands with players like Calvin Johnson. As high as I am on Charles Johnson, he's had a bad, I think, season so far relative to the expectations that the coaches had of him and the Vikings fans had of him. Mike Wallace has probably been better, but he's a particular kind of receiver. Jarius Wright, may not be able to play. Charles Johnson might not even be able to play. And so, the Vikings, who had a bit of wide receiver depth, might be challenged in terms of receiver depth. Is there a matchup that you think the Vikings, from a receiver defensive back perspective, should be, challenging more and more often? Like, is there a better matchup for the Vikings, somewhere between the receivers and the defensive backs?
That's so tough to say. The objective here, because you're going to get Mike Wallace, probably is going to get a lot of Chris Harris, and then Aqib Talib will cover the other side in this case. Roby would line up on the outside if they moved a Wallace or right to the slot. So that's it's just tough. It's tough to do. But you've got Roby who can jam and is playing lights out. Talib who can jam and is playing lights out. Harris isn't much of a press corner, but he covers everybody on the field so well. It's just tough to find a matchup in there. I think the matchup to exploit again is that tight end safety linebacker matchup. That's really what your bread and butter. It's going to be a lot of Adrian Peterson trying to mow people down, and then a lot of Kyle Rudolph and whoever the second tight end is trying to take advantage of that spot in the middle where the Broncos are the weakest.
And the one name we haven't mentioned when talking about this matchup, Teddy Bridgewater. Just talk a little bit about maybe, what your thoughts of him pre-draft were, what your thoughts about him so far, if you've been able to watch a little bit of him so far, and talk about how his strengths and weaknesses match up with the way that the Denver defense is going to play.
Well, Teddy does have a quick release. He manipulates the safeties well with his eyes, which I think is going to be a big thing. That was one of the things when I was scouting him coming out. I always ask, opposing defensive backs. I find my list of quarterbacks, then I'll go ask opposing defensive backs in the conference they played, who was the toughest quarterback? Who was the guy who manipulated best with his eyes? And unanimously that year, it was Teddy Bridgewater that everybody mentioned that did that. So, he does that. He manipulates well with his eyes, and he's good off of play action. So if you can establish the run early and you can get him out there, he's a good decision maker. He's accurate with the football. Maybe doesn't have the best deep ball accuracy, but he's getting there. I think the Vikings could be successful. They certainly have a shot this game. I just think the key again is going to be establish the run early and setting up play action for that tight end over the middle. I think that's the key. If the Vikings can get 2 or 3 of those in the game and consistently convert on third down, because that's been everybody's problem against the Broncos, then they have a good shot at this game.
Okay, and then special teams real quick. Brandon McManus, I think, was a big surprise, but it sounds like he's been playing pretty excellently this year. I know he's been excellent on my fantasy teams. I picked him up in all of them. And Britton Colquitt is from from my understanding, a pretty phenomenal punter. From what I've seen, a pretty great punter. Does this special teams advantage give the Broncos maybe a hidden advantage that a lot of people aren't talking about?
There may be some of that. The thing about McManus is he hits well from deep, but when you start getting close, he starts shanking kicks. That's the problem. That's why they brought
Okay.
Connor Barth in last year. McManus gives you the ability to be kickoff specialist and hit the deep field goals. He shanks kicks. They're close, and so that's kind of been a problem.
Mm-hmm.
Looking at Colquitt, you hit the nail on the head. He's a great punter. The Colquitt family's great punters. That's that's not to be said. The problem with the Broncos special teams is they're so bad at punt return. They've had to put Emmanuel Sanders back there as a punt returner, and then the kick return has just been borderline awful as well. You pretty much using Norwood for that, and it's not good. So those are areas of concerns. While they do have the kind of the defensive special teams portion of it down, the offensive special teams in terms of returning the ball has been a bit of an issue.
Sure. Well, that makes sense. And then, one final question before we get into something we have all our listeners or all of our guests do, which is a score prediction. Nobody's been right yet, so no pressure. But just real quick, the Vikings have made 2 of the past 3 quarterbacks they've been up against have to undergo some sort of medical checkup either during or after the game. I know, Philip Rivers was an injury scare during the game. Matt Stafford had to get an X-ray and didn't even know he was bleeding from his elbow. And some of that is, just circumstance because football's a tough game, but it sounds like the Vikings have been able to get to the quarterback quite a bit. Is Brock Osweiler good enough to win the game if the Vikings knock Peyton Manning out?
I think that is the question. The answer that I have to give to that is that he's good enough not to lose it for you, but no one's
That's what you want out of a backup.
Right. No one's sure if he's good enough to put a team on his back and win it for you.
Okay.
He's been efficient this preseason. He's been effective within the confines of the offense, and he's more suited for the Kubiak offense. They'll go under center if Osweiler gets in there. But in terms of needing to bring you back from a deficit, we haven't seen him do it. We don't know if he can or not.
Sure. And as a backup, I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation that he won't lose a one game. Okay, so let's talk about score predictions. Like I said, we've been doing this for about 2.5 years. No one's gotten a score prediction right, either us or the guests. Dusty claims he was close once.
I know I was close once.
Oh, it's fantastic. But it's tradition, and it's also something that everybody always does. So we're going to ask you to give us a score prediction for the game.
Well, I think this is going to be a hard-fought game, probably lower scoring than most people think. Final score 27-23, and I'm going to give the edge to the Denver Broncos.
All right. I think you're right about this low-scoring game, in part because of something that you briefly mentioned, pace. The Vikings are a very slow team. They were last year, and the Broncos are becoming a slower team, like you mentioned. And even if the offenses are efficient, that's going to cause a problem in terms of the over-under. So I agree that it's going to be a low-scoring game. I also agree, unfortunately, that this is going to be a home win, not just because of home field advantage, but I think that that's going to play, a pretty significant role because of the nature of Denver's home field advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wouldn't be surprised to see a similar scoring margin, but I'm going to go, 24-20 Broncos.
See, and I'm thinking that it's going to be something a little bit lower than that. I think that the defense is going to be, this is going to be a nice little war of attrition going on, and I think that with the defenses fighting as well as they're going to, that we may end up seeing a 14-17 game, and whether or not that's Vikings or whether or not that's Vikings or Manning. I want to say that the Vikings are going to pull this out, but logic tells me that we're not going to be leaving Denver with a win. But I think it's going to be close. I think that Blair Walsh might end up being the difference.
Oh, that sounds very depressing.
that is all I've been aiming for my entire time on the podcast. Is just. What?
Well,
can I throw a wet blanket on somebody? Here you go.
Well, I mean, he's performing in a stadium that's friendly to kickers. I mean, I think that history is proven, as well as some math I've seen advanced NFL stats do before they became advanced football analytics, before they became part of ESPN, is that there's a 5-yard advantage to kicking in Denver. So maybe that also means an accuracy advantage. I don't know.
I can tell you can definitely kick the ball further. We saw during camp this season, McManus was making them from 75 yards. So the thin air definitely makes a difference, as far as that goes. And accuracy, it's a little windy, so I wouldn't put it on that.
Fair enough. Hey, Ben, unless there's something specific about the matchup or something you wanted to ask us in general, that's the end of the preview portion of the show. We loved having you on. Is there anything you wanted to add?
No, not really. I appreciate you guys having me on, and we'll have to do this again soon.
Awesome.
We'll have to bring you on when Manning is on TV, so next year, and and the Broncos decide to come here and just absolutely confuse the hell out of us in a home game that somehow, I think the last home game that we played was against a Tebow-led Broncos team.
I remember that.
That may have been Tebow's first or second win.
No, he was Tebow mania by that. I mean, Ben, you remember this game, right? It was after the Lions loss. I remember that.
Right.
But he had a couple of wins by that point, right?
That was actually Tebow's best game outside of playing that entire second-string Steelers defense in the playoffs. That was literally his best game passing.
Which, if you mention that to a Steelers fan, they just like fall on the floor and start convulsing. Like they're not necessarily having a stroke, but they're trying to make it look like it, so you change the subject.
Not fans of Tebow 316, huh?
Oh,
all right.
man.
Well, thanks so much, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, man.
Oh, anytime, guys, anytime.
All right, so once again, thank you, Benjamin. That was awesome. We will definitely have to do that again sometime. Now it's time for the mailbag and your questions. Once again, you can get to us at Norse Code DN, which is our preferred method of receiving questions. You can also email us at norsecodepodcast@gmail.com. Or you can just harass Arif or myself enough times, and we'll get it on the show. So, first question is from Twitter, from Josh Bjork, who asks, how does the all-22 of the receivers look? Are they all getting open?
Okay, so first question I'm going to answer is one you didn't ask. Josh, you're a fun Twitter follower, and I like it when you interact with me, but you got to change your avatar from being an egg. It's so easy for me to dismiss egg Twitters that, you're not a bad follower. I just feel like you're not living up to your potential. But two, the receivers on the all-22, are they getting open? I think that they're getting opened, a little bit less often than if you take a look at receivers from other teams within the rhythm of the offense. And I think some of that has to do with the fact that the offensive rhythm sometimes occasionally seems off. The step, like the 3-step and the 5-step drop, sometimes doesn't align at when the receivers make their break, and I think that's more a receiver problem than a Teddy problem. But that's overselling. That doesn't happen all that often, but it does happen. But when the receivers do get open, Teddy Bridgewater is decent at identifying. He's pretty good at identifying them, but sometimes doesn't quite take those deeper shots down the field. There are a lot of instances where deeper downfield you'll see a Kyle Rudolph, Jarius Wright, or Mike Wallace open, and Teddy chooses to go underneath to like Red Ellison or Adrian Peterson or whoever. But the receivers are getting open maybe about an average amount, maybe not as much as some other teams. So maybe you have a little bit below average amount, but I wouldn't say that the receivers, in terms of their ability to get open or to create windows, actually a better term for that is to create windows for a quarterback to pass to, because open is a difficult concept to really think about when you look at it. But when you take a look at all 22 and try to look for windows or passing lanes from the quarterback to the receiver, that's a better way to look at it. And there's always passing lanes available to Teddy within the context of the rhythm of the route that, on occasion, he has to buy time, but for the most part, they're there. The bigger issue, I think, with the receivers is, I think Charles Johnson is not reliable in contested catch situations. It's something that we talked about in the preseason, that it absolutely looked like he had overcome this problem in the past couple of games. It looks like it came back a little bit. But I think that for the most part, the issue in terms of the passing offense is less to do with receivers and more to do with the amount of pressure that we have and the amount of pressure that the offensive line is letting through, and also the amount of pressure that Teddy creates and some of the decisions that Teddy makes to maybe go short of the sticks and stuff like that. So I wouldn't say that the passing offense, those issues are necessarily the receiver, but they also do not have much of an ability to change the passing offense positively, like AJ Green or Calvin Johnson or Des Bryant or Julio Jones does. So, the receivers are all right. That's my answer.
They're getting there, and that's the important thing. Jesse Silaba asks, I noticed the Vikings using some 3-3-5. Is this normal? And what kind of flexibility does it give them when mixing coverages and blitzing?
Whether or not this is normal, I don't really know how to answer that. It's something that you see a lot in college. It's a different kind of 3-3-5 that you'll see in college because they do their run fits a little bit differently. But at the NFL level, I mean, there's some teams that do run 3-3-5 on occasion as their nickel package. You'd think there'd be more 3-4 teams that do it, and some of them do. I think the Chiefs do a 3-3-5 in their nickel package a lot, but you'll see a lot of 4-3 teams do 3-3-5 because the way that it's done at the professional level, one of the ways that it's different is that the linebackers aren't stacked immediately behind the defensive tackles or the defensive linemen. And so they each get their own gap responsibility. And in terms of like things like flexibility, it gives you kind of the flexibility that a 3-4 defense does in terms of disguising looks and determining who's going to be rushing the passer and who's not going to be rushing the passer. That's kind of one of the benefits of a 3-4 defense is that you don't know which linebacker is necessarily going to be attacking. But it's not something the Vikings are necessarily as familiar with or something they have as much practice with. So you're just a little bit more likely to see coverage mix-ups, but it does give the Vikings the ability to counter some of the issues that come with going into your nickel package normally. When teams roll out like a 3-receiver set, because a lot of teams have the ability to run out of a 3-receiver set, and you don't have the ability to attack those gaps all that well, despite having 4 defensive linemen. If you've got 3 linebackers who are sideline to sideline, they have the ability to not just to blow up fullbacks, but to avoid blocks and get in. And then I think the last thing is that in terms of run fronts, it's not something offenses are used to seeing as much. And so their run fronts kind of get messed up. And so they don't have the ability to take the correct angles when they're blocking. But Jesse, when you talk about like blitzing and mixing coverages, I think that's the primary responsibility. So I think you're right that it gives them the kind of flexibility that they need in order to disguise what they're doing. But it also gives the Vikings the ability to get a bunch of pass rushers on the field at once. Eric Kendricks is not great at pass rushing, but he's done well for the Vikings so far. You get Anthony Barr up there. You get Everson Griffin as one of the 3. Brian Robinson is one of the 3, and then Sharif Floyd is one of the 3. And so instead of having Linval Joseph plugging up a lane, you have Anthony Barr attacking, Harrison Smith attacking, etc. So it gives them a different kind of flexibility.
Next question is one near and dear to my heart. Next question we want to bring up comes from Alex Goebel on Twitter, who asks, how do we counter Von Miller's glasses?
I think you have to be aggressive. I think that the team needs to tweet out another business trip, maybe 2 business trips, with immaculately dressed Vikings and Cordero Patterson.
Oh, and let's not forget that Rick Spielman needs a new suit. I feel like we mentioned that last show, but seriously, Spielman needs a new suit.
Yeah, that's actually probably going to be the key to countering Von Miller's glasses. I think that the biggest weakness that the Vikings have is Rick Spielman's suit. It just needs to fit. Stop all of them from Chris.
It's not often that we get to say that that's the biggest problem affecting the Vikings this week, but it's entirely possible that it is, that his suit game is just not on point. Interesting to note, though, and I just wanted to bring it up because it's kind of cool. Von Miller has a foundation that provides eye screening to kids and provides glasses to those who are in need in the Denver area. I just think that's kind of cool that he's become famous for wearing glasses in post-game shows or in post-game interviews and everything, and has worn glasses since like the 5th grade. But that he's a part of a foundation that does that. I think that's kind of cool. I still think we're going to beat them, but I think that it's important that we not beat a man with his glasses on.
We'll politely ask him to take those glasses off, and then we'll punch him in the face.
Exactly. Great. Next question. Chesil on Twitter asks, right guard Clemmings, TJ Clemmings, seems to be doing a solid job. How would you rate his first 3 games?
I disagree. And I think one of the reasons that he's not doing a solid job, but it might look like he's doing a solid job, is something that, if you already heard the interview with Ben, is something that I've been talking about a little bit, and it's something I've been tracking in an Excel document. You'll see a lot of it in the quarterly review, but Clemmings is not taking on edge rushers. Rudolph and Ellison sometimes one-on-one, not even just chipping, but will one-on-one take on edge rushers instead of Clemmings. And Clemmings is helping Harris, which is one of the reasons Harris looks good, but I mean, Harris just looks good. And I would say that Clemmings' first 3 games, he's getting so much help. It's difficult to rate his games, but because he's getting help, I would say that, he is a liability, but I wouldn't say that the thing that he's doing is bad. And he does give up blocks, and he's been a little bit better about it than he was in the preseason. But in the run game, he's been at issue. He still doesn't finish. In the passing game, he doesn't have an assignment that's easy to grade. But when he does have an edge rusher, and when I say he doesn't take on edge rushers, I'm not saying that. I mean, I'm saying that his proportion of taking on edge rushers is unusual. I mean, I remember when we talked about helping Matt Khalil out last year by chipping and stuff like that. The proportion of by the end of the season, the Vikings started doing that. The proportion of passes that Matt Khalil had help on in terms of chips from a running back or a tight end, or instances where Kyle Rudolph or Red Ellison would take on a defensive end or outside linebacker head on, was so significantly lower than the proportion that TJ Clemmings has, that, I think it's surprising. So I shouldn't say he doesn't take them on, but the split is astounding. It's something like 50-50 on pass plays where he doesn't take on the edge rusher, someone else does. But on those instances where he takes on edge rushers, it's not great. I think the second offensive play of the game, this last game, is one of the, is when he did that, and there was immediate pressure. But I would say that a lot of the issues in this last game, Teddy created a lot of them. I mean, he walked into, a lot of pressure on, I think it might have been on a deep ball, but it wasn't an interception, but it was a nearly interceptable on a deep ball. He walked into pressure that, Clemmings was fine on. I think he may have even walked into Mike Harris's pressure after moving away from Clemmings when there wasn't any pressure that he was giving up. So, a lot of the pressure that we saw, it wasn't necessarily his fault in this game, but he didn't have a lot of opportunities to be positive or negative. So I would say that Clemmings is actually not doing that great of a job because his assignments are not great and are not easy or not hard. But when they are difficult, he doesn't do a good job. But if you're talking about right guard Mike Harris, yeah, he's doing a great job. A+, actually.
Yeah, Harris is doing a pretty good job. Clemmings is still trying to find his feet, which shouldn't be surprised, seeing as how A, he's a rookie, and B, he was thrust into this role with very little preparation thanks to the load hold injury.
And C, he's only played offensive tackle for 2 years. 2 years, period, at any level of football.
Yeah, so he's coming along. It's one of those. It's one of those, you're limping, and as a result, your whole body is kind of trying to adjust or adapt to it. And whether or not this continues to be a thing later in the season may be the big point of Vikings injury. Like, it would probably be fairly easy to target that after a while. Like, okay, well, we know that that's where they are going to be supporting him, so how do we get them away from it? And try to scheme it out. So this becomes a glaring problem later in the year, but for the moment, it hasn't been exploited too terribly yet.
Luckily, I think, and I mentioned this again in the interview, I think Denver's going to. They rush 5. I think Denver's going to.
Yeah. So, last question, and I feel as if this is the most important question of the show. It is it's from Gazank, who asks, was Everson Griffen mic'd up the best thing ever?
Okay, response 1, your question came in, I believe, after you changed your avatar to that phenomenal dog with a toupee and headphones. So, +1, Gazank. 2, on the ranking of Vikings mic'd up, I think Everson Griffen's pretty high. He's clearly better than Adi Cole.
Yep.
But he's historically lower then Brett Favre,
Yep.
then Jared Allen, and then John Randall.
Yeah.
So
those three are on. I hate the term, but are definitely on the Mount Rushmore of Vikings mic'd up. I think that Favre still has to take first, especially the Dallas Cowboys game where he was running around slapping asses and
about piss and vinegar.
Yep, and kept trying to get one to Sydney. I keep on trying to get one to you, and.
Didn't Sydney get like 200 yards in that game?
Yeah, he got 200 yards and no touchdown, and Sydney's just sitting there going, I don't understand it, man. I just keep going for it. And it also included the famous ending with the pants on the ground thing at the very end of that Cowboys game. So or that was in the locker room anyway. But yeah, I think the Favre mic'd up has to be number one. Boy, Jared Allen's one has to be. Jared Allen had one that has to be right near the top of the list. I'm trying to remember which game that was.
Oh, I mean, it's been so long, I don't remember. Yeah. Especially because Jared Allen is not that much different when he talks to the media, which is unique among players. But yeah, he's hilarious. So that all runs together.
Did you ever see the Jared Allen Wes Welker Pro Bowl thing where they were doing the training for the Pro Bowl or training for the off season? It was a thing through Kenny Mayne, I believe.
Oh, is this when Jared Allen threw was a quarterback for a little bit?
Yep, he was working on his No, that was actually a different one.
It was a different Kenny Mayne?
It was a different Kenny Mayne thing because that one was the one where he was rocking the Canadian tuxedo.
Right.
That's when he was rocking the whole jean short thing. In the show notes, we'll include a link to the video of Kenny Mayne doing a thing with Wes Welker, who is wearing a fat suit and bowling, trying to get in shape for the Pro Bowl. And Jared Allen is in the middle of the desert meditating and chasing after a midget. And that is a good explanation because it's absolutely hilarious and it is definitely needed to be watched.
Okay, so to answer your question, Gazank, Everson Griffin is good, not great. In terms of Mike. We will include a link to the video. There is something in the video that did not make it on the Vikings video, so I'll try to find a link to the full video. But if I can't find a link other than the Vikings official link, then I'll also include a link to another video that includes some more hilarious outtakes from the game, where Phillip Rivers is a toddler and Everson Griffin is a troll. It's amazing.
The only thing that could have made it better is if Everson Griffin would have said to Phillip Rivers, all the kids in bolo ties in the world aren't going to change the score right now. That's the only thing that he was missing.
Well, yeah, it was pretty good, especially he kept on giving Adrian Peterson a different nickname as the game progressed. Big Brown, Chief, AD. It was great.
Yep, and just wanted to make sure that the Greenway knew that the whole reason why you got that pick is because I took a guy out and put him on top of Phillip Rivers.
Chad. Where's Chad? Chad. I just want to tell you the only reason you got that pick.
It was but we definitely do encourage you to watch the Everson Griffin mic'd up. It's really, really funny. It's really, really good, and he looked just like a kid out there. Oh God! I actually said it. Okay. No. Well, on that note, I feel like we have to end so I can't do any more damage to the show. If you would like to follow us on Twitter, you can certainly do so at NorseCodeDN. You can also follow myself at Big Mono. You can follow Arif at Arif Hassan NFL. And you can follow Dusty, who should be back next week, at Dusty O'Connell. If you'd like to donate to the show, you can do so at NorseCodePodcast.com. You can go to the very bottom of the page and click on the donate link. You can also click on the Patreon link, which should be also on the website and on the Daily Norseman show page that we have for each show. So next week we're looking at a bye week. We do a bye week spectacular, some fireworks, some crazy stuff, maybe even a Dusty appearance.
I mean, that'd be pretty astounding. It's a good time, actually, because it allows us to do a quarterly review and talk to Dusty about the Denver game because he's from Denver, and I can't believe he couldn't make the show.
Yep, that's the whole thing. Dusty is in the middle of moving, and it's just not possible yet to hear from him. I don't even think I'll hear from him for the next week anyway. It's too bad. But we should be back next week. We look forward to hearing from you. We look forward to your comments or your questions. Please send them in. We always like to hear from our listeners. Hopefully the show audio has been improved over the last 2 weeks. Please let us know, again, feedback. We want to hear from you. Otherwise, on behalf of Dusty, on behalf of Arif and myself, thank you for listening, and our formula is this: keep Teddy alive. Also, our formula is Christian Ponder lacks poise. We'll see you next week.
Norse Code is the official podcast of the Daily Norseman SB Nation blog and is produced with cooperation from Pompous Jerk Productions. Pompous Jerk Productions. Attitude with attitude. The opinions expressed in this podcast are solely those of their contributors and do not reflect official positions of the Minnesota Vikings, SB Nation, the Daily Norseman staff, or PJP. No information in this podcast should be construed as gambling advice. Please obey all local gaming laws.
Our formula is this: we go out, we hit people in the mouth.